When I walked into the ballroom of the Marriott for the Women in Finance Awards, the entire room fell silent, then erupted in hushed whispers and barely concealed laughter. Bethany Williams, the 34-year-old CEO who had replaced him 6 months earlier, looked me straight in the eyes and announced to the table, "I think someone's grandmother got lost on her way to bingo night." The word sliced through me like a serrated knife dragged across bearskin. Someone's grandmother. I had founded that company. I had built it from nothing, over 23 years, to the powerhouse it had become. But in that moment, with my carefully styled silver hair and the emerald dress I'd spent $1,250 on, I was just someone's grandmother. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead as heat simultaneously flooded my cheeks. My throat constricted so tightly I could barely breathe, and the metallic taste of humiliation flooded my mouth. The crystal chandeliers above seemed to dim, the light narrowing to a pinpoint as I stood frozen at the entrance. My invitation clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles had gone white. Someone's grandmother. The room of 347 finance professionals, my peers, my colleagues, people I'd mentored and worked alongside for decades, watched with a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment as I stood there. All 56 years of me suddenly feeling ancient and irrelevant. I'd received the invitation 3 weeks earlier, an engraved cardstock envelope addressed to Margaret Wilson, founder, Emeritus Pinnacle Financial Group, had arrived at my condo on Lakeshore Drive. The Emeritus title still stung, a meaningless honorific they'd given me when the board had decided, after my divorce and subsequent 2-month medical leave for stress-related hypertension, that the company needed fresh blood and a more dynamic presence. I'd built Pinnacle from my spare bedroom in 1999 into a firm managing over $4.2 billion in assets by 2024. But apparently, at 56, I was now emeritus, obsolete, a relic. I'd debated for days whether to attend. The rational part of me said to stay home, to preserve what was left of my dignity after the humiliating board meeting where they'd informed me of the new direction. But another part, the fighter who had clawed her way up from a middle-class family in Cleveland to the executive suites of Chicago, couldn't bear the thought of slinking away. So I'd made the appointments: hair salon, makeup artist, the designer boutique on Michigan Avenue, where I'd purchased the emerald silk dress that now felt like it was suffocating me, as 347 pairs of eyes bored into my soul. My hands shook as I realized I had 2 choices: turn around and flee, confirming every whispered speculation that Margaret Wilson was done, past her prime, couldn't handle the pressure anymore, or walk forward into that sea of pitying glances and barely concealed disdain. I took one trembling step forward, then another. The weight of my designer clutch felt suddenly like a boulder as I forced myself to move toward the assigned table near the back of the room. Table 19. Not the prominent tables up front where I'd sat for the past 15 years. "Margaret, over here." A familiar voice cut through the buzzing in my ears. Diana Chen, 62, former CFO of Midwest Bank, waved from a table even farther back than mine, table 23. Diana, who had retired last year amid rumors that she'd been pushed out for a 38-year-old male wunderkind from Goldman Sachs. I changed course, relief washing over me like a cool breeze as I made my way to her table. "Thank God you're here," I whispered as I sank into the empty chair beside her. "I thought I'd made a terrible mistake coming." Diana's eyes, lined with the same fine wrinkles as mine, hardened as she glanced toward the front tables. "No, Margaret. The mistake would be letting them think they've won. Do you know where they've seated us? The legacy table is what I heard one of the event planners call it. Legacy, like we're already dead and just plaques on a wall somewhere." My stomach twisted as I looked around table 23. Barbara Johnson, 59, who had been edged out of her position as head of risk management at First Capital last year. Elaine Winters, 64, whose hedge fund had been acquired in a hostile takeover by younger partners. Susan Kim, 57, whose fintech startup had lost its funding after she'd been labeled out of touch with millennial investors. All brilliant women, all now sitting at the equivalent of the children's table at this industry event. Welcome to the island of misfit toys, Susan said, raising her glass of champagne in a mock toast, where finance executives go when they commit the unforgivable sin of aging while female. I tried to smile, but the muscles in my face felt frozen. 3 months ago, I'd still been sitting at table 1. The untouchable Margaret Wilson, who had survived 3 market crashes, 2 global financial crises, and countless attempts to discredit her. 3 months ago, the current of whispers behind my back had just been starting concerns about my energy levels after I'd taken time off following my divorce. Questions about whether I was still hungry enough for the increasingly competitive market. 3 months ago, I'd dismissed those whispers. Now, they had become a roar that had swept me from my corner office on the 47th floor to this table of discarded women. The lights dimmed for the presentation to begin. A spotlight illuminated the stage as Bethany Williams, resplendent in a red designer dress that probably cost more than my first car, took the microphone. My replacement, 22 years my junior, with her Silicon Valley pedigree, and her TED Talk, and her 119,000 Instagram followers. The woman who now occupied the office I had designed, sitting in the chair I had special ordered for my back problems, leading the team I had personally hired and mentored. "Good evening, everyone," she purred into the microphone, her voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. "Welcome to the 25th Annual Women in Finance Awards. Tonight we celebrate not just achievement, but vision. Not just the path behind us, but the horizon ahead." The room erupted in applause. I clapped mechanically, my $175 manicure catching the light as I went through the motions. "The financial world is changing faster than ever before," Bethany continued. "And tonight, we honor those who aren't just keeping up, but leading the charge into a new era." Diana leaned close to my ear. "Notice how she's not even acknowledging the women who built the road she's driving on." I nodded, a knot forming in my throat. For 23 years, I had fought tooth and nail to be taken seriously in rooms full of men. I had sacrificed my marriage, postponed having children until it was too late, worked 80-hour weeks, all to prove that women belonged in the highest echelons of finance. And now I was watching a woman who had benefited from those sacrifices effectively declare me obsolete. As we look to the future, Bethany was saying, her perfect teeth gleaming under the spotlight, we need to embrace new perspectives, fresh energy, and innovative approaches. The challenges of tomorrow won't be solved with yesterday's thinking. Barbara Johnson made a soft scoffing sound beside me. Translation: anyone over 45 need not apply. I felt something shift inside me as I watched Bethany command the room that should have been mine. It wasn't jealousy, exactly. It was something deeper, more primal. The acute awareness that I had been discarded, deemed obsolete, written off. Not because I had failed or faltered or made poor decisions, but simply because the calendar had continued to turn, adding lines around my eyes and silver to my hair. As the awards ceremony proceeded, I sat in a fog, barely registering the names called, and the applause that followed. I had been nominated for Outstanding Leadership 6 times in my career, winning twice. This year, my name wasn't even on the list. The category had been replaced with Emerging Leader, and all 5 nominees were under 40. By the time dessert was served, a delicate lemon tart that I barely tasted, I had made a decision. This would not be my last chapter. This humiliation, this dismissal, this erasure, it would not define me. I didn't know yet what form my resurrection would take, but sitting there, surrounded by women who had been similarly discarded, I felt something hardening within me. Resolve, determination, and yes, anger, a slow-burning ice-cold anger that would fuel what came next. Little did I know, as I forced myself to stay until the bitter end of that awards ceremony, that in exactly 347 days, 1 day for each person who had witnessed my humiliation, I would return to that same ballroom. Not as someone's grandmother, not as a relic or a legacy or an emeritus anything, but as something none of them, least of all Bethany Williams, would ever see coming. That night, as I rode the elevator up to my condo on the 31st floor, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I didn't throw my $1,250 emerald dress into the trash or smash the Crystal Award I'd received 5 years earlier for lifetime achievement in financial innovation. Instead, I did what had made me successful in the first place. I began to plan. The next morning, I woke at 5:15 a.m., the same time I had risen every workday for the past 2 decades. For a brief, disorienting moment, I reached for my phone to check the overnight markets, before remembering that was no longer my responsibility. The sharp pang that followed was familiar now, a daily reminder of all I had lost. But today, it felt different. Less like grief, more like fuel. I made coffee in the kitchen, where I now spent too much time, looking out over the lake as dawn painted the water in shades of pink and gold. For 23 years, I had only seen this view on weekends, too busy during the week to appreciate the luxury I had worked so hard to afford. Now I had nothing but time, stretching before me like the vast expanse of water on the horizon. My phone chimed with a text from Diana. Breakfast at Pierrot Gourmet, 8:30. We need to talk about last night. I texted back my agreement, grateful for the structure it would give my morning. Since the transition 6 months ago, I had struggled to fill my days. The consulting work promised by the board had never materialized. The speaking engagements had dried up. The invitations to sit on other boards had mysteriously disappeared. It was as if turning 56 had rendered me not just unemployed, but unemployable. As I dressed for breakfast, casual but still polished, a habit I couldn't break, I thought about table 23 from the night before. 5 women with over 150 years of combined experience in finance, all sidelined within the past 18 months. All replaced by younger models who promised fresh perspectives and digital native thinking. All watching from the sidelines as their life's work was repackaged and rebranded by people who hadn't lived through the 2008 crisis or the dot-com bubble or any of the hard lessons we had learned through experience. Pierrot Gourmet was busy when I arrived at 8:27. The morning rush of business people, grabbing coffee and pastries before heading to their offices. I spotted Diana in a corner booth, already nursing a cappuccino, her silver bob immaculate as always. As I made my way to her, I noticed something I hadn't registered the night before. Diana looked rested. The perpetual shadows under her eyes that had been her constant companion during our working years had faded. There was a softness to her that I hadn't seen before. "You look good," I said, as I slid into the booth across from her. Diana's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Amazing what 8 hours of sleep will do. You should try it sometime." "I sleep," I protested. Though we both knew that my version of sleep had always been 5 hours of tossing and turning, plagued by to-do lists and market concerns. Double quotes. Diana didn't press the point. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes suddenly intense. "So, last night," I echoed, the humiliation washing over me anew. "I've been thinking," Diana said, stirring her cappuccino absently. "What if table 23 isn't where careers go to die? What if it's where they go to be reborn?" I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite my skepticism. "I'm listening. Between the 5 of us, we have more experience, more connections, and frankly, more battle scars than all those front tables combined. What if we stopped trying to claw our way back to those tables and built our own damn table instead?" The idea hung between us, tantalizing in its audacity. "What exactly are you proposing?" Diana's eyes gleamed with an energy I remembered from our younger days, when we'd both been climbing the ranks, determined to break through the glass ceiling. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I know I'm not ready to be put out to pasture. And neither are you, Margaret. Neither are any of us." For the first time since the board meeting 6 months ago, I felt a flicker of something like hope. The 5 of us, working together. Why not? Barbara's risk management expertise, Elaine's hedge fund experience, Susan's tech knowledge, your leadership and vision, my financial acumen. We're practically a ready-made executive team. I thought about it, mind already racing through possibilities, challenges, opportunities. This was how my brain was wired, always looking for the angle, the strategic advantage. It would take capital, connections, a unique value proposition. Diana smiled, a slow, knowing smile that reminded me why she had been such a formidable CFO. All of which we have, or can get. The question is, are you in? I don't even know what I'm in for, I said, but I was already feeling more alive than I had in months. Neither do I, exactly. But I know this. I refuse to spend the next 20 years watching younger women take credit for the paths we blazed. I refuse to be grateful for the occasional pat on the head, an invitation to give legacy perspectives. And I absolutely refuse to be seated at table 23 ever again. The waitress arrived to take my order, and I realized I was actually hungry for the first time in weeks. As I asked for avocado toast and a latte, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror behind Diana. My silver hair, which I had finally stopped coloring after years of monthly $300 appointments. The fine lines around my eyes that told the story of late nights poring over financial statements and early mornings strategizing for market openings. The slight softening of my jawline that no amount of expensive creams could reverse. I saw a woman who had been cast aside because of these physical markers of experience. But I also saw something else. A woman who wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I'm in, I said to Diana, the words coming out before I had fully processed all the implications. Whatever it is, I'm in. And just like that, at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in a cafe, in downtown Chicago, the seeds of what would become my resurrection were planted. Someone's grandmother was about to show them exactly what she was capable of. 3 days later, the 5 of us met at my condo. I had spent those days in a flurry of activity, researching, making calls, reconnecting with contacts I hadn't spoken to in months. It felt good to have purpose again, to feel my mind engaging with problems more complex than which streaming service to subscribe to or whether to try the new restaurant down the street. Barbara arrived first, punctual as always, a thick folder of papers under her arm. I've been doing some preliminary risk assessments, she said by way of greeting, not bothering with small talk. Classic Barbara. Susan came next, already talking a mile a minute about market gaps and digital platforms before she'd even taken off her coat. Elaine arrived with a bottle of expensive champagne, announcing, "We're celebrating tonight, even if we don't know what we're celebrating yet." Diana was last, apologizing for the delay. "Doctor's appointment," she explained. "Apparently, not working 70-hour weeks has improved my blood pressure. Who knew?" We gathered around my dining table, 5 women with laptops and notepads and decades of experience between us. For the first 2 hours, we shared our stories, not the sanitized versions we had told at industry events, but the raw, unfiltered truth of what it meant to be a woman in finance, and then to be a woman of a certain age in finance. Barbara described being passed over for the CEO position she had been explicitly groomed for, in favor of a man 12 years her junior who had been with the company half as long. "They told me they needed someone with long-term growth potential," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "As if I planned to drop dead at 60. Elaine recounted how her partners had gradually excluded her from key decisions, scheduled important meetings during her physical therapy appointments following a knee replacement, and finally offered her a generous buyout that amounted to less than 30% of what her stake was worth. "They knew I was going through a costly divorce and needed liquidity," she said. "They used that vulnerability against me." Susan told us how the venture capital that had been all but guaranteed for her fintech startup had mysteriously evaporated after an investor meeting where one partner had questioned whether she really understood how young people use financial technology. And Diana shared how she had been systematically undermined. In her final year at Midwest Bank, her budget cut, her team reassigned, her recommendations ignored, until retirement seemed like the only dignified option left. As I listened to these stories, so similar to my own, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just about me and my humiliation at the awards ceremony. This was systemic. This was happening to women everywhere. Women who had spent their lives breaking barriers only to find a new, insidious barrier waiting for them. The perception that their value had an expiration date. "Here's what I see," I said, finally breaking the silence that had fallen after Diana finished her story. We've all been discarded because of a narrative that says experience has less value than youth, that wisdom and judgment count for less than energy and innovation, that somehow, mysteriously, women's competence diminishes with age while men become distinguished and authoritative. 4 pairs of eyes focused intently on me, and I felt a familiar sensation, the feeling of a room's attention when I was making a pitch that mattered. God, I had missed this. But what if that narrative is not just wrong, but backwards? What if our experience is exactly what the market needs right now? What if our judgment, honed by decades of navigating complex financial landscapes, is actually our greatest asset? Elaine leaned forward. Go on. What I'm proposing is this. We create a financial advisory firm specifically targeted at women over 50. Women who, like us, have been sidelined, underestimated, or outright ignored by traditional financial institutions. Women who control substantial assets, but are treated like they need their hands held. Women who are tired of being talked down to by advisors young enough to be their children. Barbara nodded slowly. The demographics support it. Women over 50 control more than $19 trillion in assets in the U.S. alone. They're the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs. And they're woefully underserved by existing financial structures. Exactly, I said, warming to my theme. We position ourselves not as just another financial advisory firm, but as the only firm that truly understands the unique challenges and opportunities facing women in this demographic. We don't just manage their money, we help them navigate the next chapter of their lives, whether that's starting a business, planning for retirement, managing inheritance, or divorcing after decades of marriage. Susan's fingers were flying over her keyboard. We could build a digital platform specifically designed for this demographic. Most fintech is aimed at millennials, with interfaces that assume a certain level of comfort with technology. We could create something intuitive, powerful, but accessible to women who didn't grow up with smartphones. Diana was already running numbers on her tablet. Initial capital requirements would be significant, but not prohibitive. We all have assets, connections, potential clients already in our networks. For the next 3 hours, we hashed out details, challenged assumptions, refined the concept. It was exhilarating. I hadn't felt this engaged, this alive, since before the board had begun their whisper campaign against me. By the time we opened Elaine's champagne, we had the bones of a business plan, a rough timeline, and a growing sense of excitement that was almost palpable in the room. To Sage, Elaine said, raising her glass in a toast. Sage, I questioned. Our working title, she explained, because we're not just experienced, we're wise. And it's about damn time that wisdom was valued again. We clinked glasses, 5 women on the precipice of something new. As I looked around at these women, accomplished, intelligent, driven, and yes, over 50, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Certainty. This would work. We would make it work. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was alone again in my too-quiet condo, I pulled up the website for Pinnacle Financial Group, my company, or what had once been my company. There was Bethany Williams on the homepage, her professionally whitened smile beaming out from a candid-looking photo that had probably taken 3 hours and a professional lighting crew to achieve, leading Pinnacle into a new era, the headline proclaimed. I clicked through to the executive team page, where my absence was conspicuous. New faces, most of them decades younger than mine, looked back at me. At the very bottom of the page, under Founders and Emeritus Leadership, was a small photo of me, linked to a brief bio that summarized my 23 years of leadership in 3 bland paragraphs. The familiar surge of anger and humiliation rose within me, but this time, it was accompanied by something else, resolve. I closed the laptop with a decisive click. Bethany Williams and Pinnacle Financial Group had written me off, relegated me to the footnotes of their corporate history, but I was about to write a new chapter, one they never saw coming. The following week passed in a blur of activity. We secured office space in a building on Wacker Drive, not as prestigious as my former address but still in the heart of the financial district. Diana worked her network to line up meetings with potential investors. Barbara began drafting regulatory paperwork and compliance protocols. Susan started building our digital infrastructure. Elaine leveraged her connections to arrange meetings with potential high-net-worth clients. And I did what I had always done best. I crafted the vision, refined the message, and prepared to sell it to a world that had decided women like us were past our prime. 10 days after our initial meeting, we reconvened at the newly leased office space. The furniture was minimal, just a conference table and chairs for now, but as I looked around at the empty space, I could already envision what it would become. The headquarters of Sage Financial Partners, the first advisory firm created by and for women over 50. Before we go any further, I said, once everyone was seated, I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge. 4 pairs of eyebrows raised in varying degrees of skepticism. Okay, it's not just about revenge, I amended, which earned me knowing smiles. It's about creating something that should already exist but doesn't. It's about proving that our experience has value. It's about building a legacy that can't be erased with an emeritus title and a footnote on a website. Diana nodded, agreed. But let's also not pretend we won't enjoy proving everyone wrong. Oh, I fully intend to enjoy that part, I admitted. But if that's our only motivation, we'll fail. This has to be about more than getting back at the people who pushed us aside. It has to be about creating real value for the women we aim to serve. Barbara, ever the risk manager, spoke up. We also need to be prepared for backlash. The moment we announce this venture, we'll face scrutiny, skepticism, and probably some outright hostility. The narrative will be that we're bitter, that we couldn't cut it in the mainstream financial world anymore, that we're creating a niche firm because we had no other options. Let them say what they want, Elaine said with a dismissive wave. The numbers will speak for themselves. Yes, but perception matters in this industry, I countered. We need to control the narrative from day one. We're not creating this firm because we couldn't succeed elsewhere. We're creating it because we saw an underserved market and a unique opportunity. We're not running away from competition. We're running toward an untapped potential. Susan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. What if we embrace it? Not the bitter part, but the truth, that we've experienced firsthand how the financial industry fails women over 50. That our personal experiences have given us insight no one else has. That we're turning what others see as a liability, our age, into our greatest asset. I felt a smile spreading across my face. That's exactly right. We don't hide from who we are. We lead with it. Our age, our experience, our perspective, these aren't things to apologize for. They're our competitive advantage. For the next few hours, we refined our strategy, assigned responsibilities, and set ambitious but achievable timelines. By the end of the meeting, we had committed $1.75 million of our own capital to the venture, established a 6-month runway to launch, and divided the key leadership roles based on our respective strengths. As we prepared to leave, Diana handed each of us a small box. A little something to make it official. She said inside each box was a sleek business card. Mine read Margaret Wilson, founding partner and CEO, Sage Financial Partners. Below the text was our newly designed logo, a stylized S that subtly incorporated a rising graph line. The cardstock was thick, the embossing elegant but understated. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering, the tactile sensation making it real in a way that all our planning hadn't quite managed. CEO, not emeritus, not founder, not legacy. CEO. Thank you, I said to Diana, uncharacteristic emotion making my voice slightly hoarse. She shrugged, but I could see she was pleased by our reactions. Just thought we should make it official. As we locked up the still empty office and headed our separate ways, I felt a lightness in my step that had been missing for months. I was building something again, creating value, using the skills and knowledge I had spent decades honing. And I was doing it with women who understood exactly what I had experienced, because they had lived it too. That night, I slept better than I had since the day the board had called me into that surprise meeting and suggested it was time for me to pursue other opportunities. For the first time in months, I wasn't lying awake rehashing old humiliations or wondering where I had gone wrong. Instead, I was planning, strategizing, looking forward. The next morning, I woke to an email that momentarily threatened my newfound equilibrium. The subject line read simply, "Here you're starting something new." The sender, Bethany Williams. My finger hovered over the delete button, tempted to banish this digital intrusion from the woman who had so casually dismissed me as someone's grandmother. But curiosity won out. I opened the email. "Margaret," it began, with a familiarity we had never established. "Word travels fast in our industry, and I've heard rumors you're launching a new venture with Diana Chen and some other former executives. I'd love to hear more about it. Perhaps we could meet for coffee. There might be potential for collaboration between Pinnacle and whatever you're building. Best, Bethany." I stared at the screen, anger and disbelief warring within me. Collaboration. After she had systematically dismantled everything I had built at Pinnacle. After she had publicly humiliated me at the awards ceremony. After she had relegated me to the corporate equivalent of the attic, to be occasionally dusted off when they needed to trot out the founder's legacy. I began typing a scathing reply, then stopped myself. This wasn't about emotional reactions. This was about strategy. Why was Bethany reaching out now? What had she heard? And from whom? Was this genuine interest, competitive intelligence gathering, or something else entirely? I closed the email without responding and called Diana. "She's fishing," Diana said immediately after I recounted the email. "Someone in her network must have gotten wind of our meetings, and now she's trying to figure out if we're a threat, which means they're already seeing us as competition," I mused. "Exactly. And that gives us leverage. Don't respond yet. Let her wonder. Let her worry. When we do reveal what we're building, we'll do it on our terms, not hers." I agreed with Diana's assessment. The email went unanswered, but I saved it. Something told me this wouldn't be the last communication from Bethany Williams. Over the next few weeks, our plans took tangible shape. We secured additional funding from investors who saw the potential in our vision. We hired a small but skilled team, deliberately including women across age brackets but with a core of experienced professionals who had also felt the sting of age discrimination. We built out our office space, designed our website, and began developing the proprietary digital platform that would set us apart from traditional advisory firms. We also began to hear whispers, rumors about what we were building, speculation about our motives, questions about whether 5 retired women could really create something innovative in the rapidly evolving financial landscape. The day we filed our regulatory paperwork, making Sage Financial Partners officially real, I received another email from Bethany. This one was shorter. Its friendly veneer thinner. "Margaret, I see you've moved forward with your new firm. I'm disappointed you didn't consider my offer to discuss potential synergies with Pinnacle. The market is highly competitive right now, especially for new entrants without the backing of established institutions. My door remains open if you reconsider. Best, Bethany." This time, I did respond, after carefully crafting my message with input from my partners. "Bethany, thank you for your interest in Sage Financial Partners. You're right that the market is competitive, which is precisely why we've identified a segment that is currently underserved by established institutions like Pinnacle. While we appreciate your offer, we're confident in our direction and our unique value proposition. I wish you continued success. Regards, Margaret Wilson, CEO, Sage Financial Partners Professional." Poised and crystal clear that we weren't interested in any synergies with the company that had discarded us. Bethany's response came within minutes. "I hope you know what you're doing, Margaret. Not everyone gets a second act in this industry." I forwarded the exchange to my partners with a single comment, and so it begins. 2 months later, we were ready for our public launch. We had secured an initial client base of 47 high-net-worth women, collectively representing over $300 million in assets under management. Our digital platform had been beta tested and refined. Our office was fully operational, with a team of 18 professionals ready to deliver on our promise of financial empowerment for women in the second half of their lives. We chose to announce our launch not with a traditional press release, but with a feature in Forbes that positioned us as innovative disruptors addressing a massive market gap. The article, titled The Wisdom Advantage: How 5 Finance Veterans Are Redefining Wealth Management for Women Over 50, included professional photographs of all 5 founding partners, our silver hair and laugh lines proudly on display. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Our website traffic spiked to levels that briefly crashed our servers. Our phone lines were flooded with inquiries. Financial news programs requested interviews. And women, hundreds of women, reached out to tell us how they had been waiting for a firm like ours. One that didn't talk down to them or assume their financial goals were limited to passive retirement planning. But not all the attention was positive. Financial industry blogs questioned our business model. Investment forums debated whether we were playing the gender card. And certain competitors, including Pinnacle, issued statements reaffirming their commitment to serving clients of all ages and backgrounds, implying that our focus was unnecessarily divisive. Through it all, we maintained our message. Sage Financial Partners wasn't about excluding anyone. It was about finally including a demographic that had been systematically underserved. It wasn't about pitting women against men or old against young. It was about recognizing that different life stages came with different financial needs and perspectives. 6 months after our launch, we had exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Our client base had grown to 372 women managing over $1.2 billion in assets. Our team had expanded to 42 professionals, including several who had left prestigious positions at firms like Pinnacle, to join our mission. And our digital platform was being hailed as a breakthrough in financial technology for its intuitive design and focus on long-term wealth strategies rather than day trading and cryptocurrency speculation. But our success had not gone unnoticed or unchallenged. Pinnacle, under Bethany's leadership, had launched a new division, specifically targeting women investors, with marketing materials that conspicuously featured silver-haired models and language about experience and wisdom that eerily echoed our own messaging. They had also begun aggressively recruiting our staff and approaching our clients with promises of lower fees and broader services. "They're trying to beat us at our own game," Barbara observed during one of our weekly strategy meetings. "They're co-opting our message but without the authentic understanding behind it." "Let them try," I said with more confidence than I sometimes felt. "They can use the same words, but they can't replicate our lived experience. They can't fake the perspective that comes from having been on both sides of the age divide in this industry." Diana, always the pragmatist, added, "Still, we need to be prepared for more direct challenges. Bethany isn't going to let us continue growing without putting up a fight." She was right, of course. The following week, an industry source leaked information to a financial blog suggesting that Sage was experiencing compliance issues and operational difficulties. The anonymous source claimed that our rapid growth had outpaced our infrastructure, and that clients were beginning to express dissatisfaction. None of it was true, but the damage was done. Our stock price, which had been steadily climbing since our IPO 3 months earlier, took a 7% hit. Client inquiries slowed, and for the first time since our launch, we saw a small but noticeable increase in account closures. "This is a coordinated attack," Elaine fumed as we gathered for an emergency meeting to address the situation. "And we all know where it's coming from. We need to respond decisively," Susan agreed. "But we can't just deny the allegations. We need to change the narrative." I nodded, already formulating a plan. "We're going to open our books. Total transparency. We'll invite independent auditors to examine our operations and publish their findings. We'll release client satisfaction metrics. And we'll do it all with the confidence of a firm that has nothing to hide." Barbara looked concerned. "That's a risky strategy. Even the healthiest firms have some issues that could be taken out of context." "True," I acknowledged. "But we're not aiming for perfection. We're aiming for authenticity, something Bethany and her team can't match." The strategy worked. The independent audit confirmed what we already knew. Sage was financially sound, operationally efficient, and in full compliance with all regulations. Our client satisfaction scores, while not perfect, were well above industry averages. And our transparency in the face of anonymous allegations earned us positive coverage and renewed client confidence. But the attack had been a wake-up call. We were a threat to established players like Pinnacle, and they would use every tool at their disposal to undermine us. We needed to be prepared for more aggressive tactics. We didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks after the anonymous leak, I received a call from James Bennett, the chairman of the board at Pinnacle, and the man who had ultimately signed off on my transition to emeritus status. "Margaret," he began without preamble, "this has gone on long enough. You've made your point. Now it's time to be reasonable." "I'm not sure what you mean, James," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "This crusade of yours, Sage, it's becoming disruptive to the industry. Clients are confused. Talent is being poached. It's creating unnecessary friction." "Unnecessary for whom, James?" "The women who finally have a financial partner that truly understands their needs. The professionals who have found a workplace that values their experience regardless of their age. Or is it just unnecessary for Pinnacle's bottom line?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "I was hoping we could discuss this reasonably. Bethany suggested we might find a path forward that benefits everyone." "I'm listening," I said, though I had a sinking feeling about what was coming next. "Pinnacle would be willing to acquire Sage at a premium. You and your partners would receive substantial compensation, and we could integrate your platform and client base into our women's division. You would be welcomed back to Pinnacle with appropriate recognition and a seat on the art board." The offer was both insulting and revealing. They didn't want to compete with us. They wanted to absorb us, neutralize us, and then gradually dismantle what made us unique. "I appreciate the offer, James, but Sage isn't for sale, especially not to Pinnacle. Don't be hasty, Margaret. This is a generous proposal, and frankly, one that might not remain on the table if your firm continues its aggressive tactics." Now we were getting to it. What aggressive tactics would those be, James? Serving a market that Pinnacle ignored until we proved it was valuable. Building technology that actually meets the needs of our clients. Being transparent when anonymous sources spread lies about our operations. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The targeted recruitment of our staff, the misleading comparisons in your marketing materials. The not-so-subtle implication that firms led by younger executives can't properly serve older women. I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. "James, everything Sage has done has been above board and within industry norms. More than I can say for whoever leaked false information about our compliance status." "I don't know anything about that," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Of course not. Just like you didn't know about the systematic marginalization of women over 50 at Pinnacle, until we made it an issue you couldn't ignore. Just like you didn't know about the client lists that were accidentally left off my transition materials. Just like you didn't know about the speaking engagements that were mysteriously canceled after I was pushed out. You're making serious accusations, Margaret." "No, James. I'm stating facts. Facts that could become very public if Pinnacle continues its own aggressive tactics against Sage." There was a long silence. When James spoke again, his tone had shifted from condescending to cautious. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we both have better things to do than engage in corporate warfare. Sage will continue to serve our clients and grow our business. Pinnacle can do the same. We don't need to be adversaries. And if we are, then you should know that 5 women with decades in this industry have collected quite a bit of documentation over the years. Documentation that might not paint Pinnacle or its board in the most flattering light. It wasn't a bluff. Each of us had indeed maintained detailed records of the discrimination and marginalization we had experienced. Emails, meeting notes, performance reviews that shifted in tone as we aged. Client feedback that was selectively presented to management. We had compared notes and found patterns that, taken together, painted a damning picture of systemic bias. "I see," James said finally. "I'll convey your position to the board. You do that, and James, The next time you or Bethany want to discuss Sage, you can contact our corporate communications department, like any other competitor. After I hung up, I sat in my office, hands trembling slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. I had just directly challenged the man who had ended my career at Pinnacle, the man who still wielded enormous influence in our industry. It was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I had done in my professional life. I called an emergency meeting with my partners to brief them on the conversation. Their reactions ranged from concerned Barbara to outright glee Elaine. "You think they'll back off?" Susan asked. "For now," I said. "But this isn't over. They've shown their hand. They see us as enough of a threat to try to buy us out. That means we're doing something right, but it also means they'll be watching for any vulnerability, any misstep. Let them watch," Diana said with uncharacteristic bravado. "We've spent our careers being underestimated. It's always been our secret weapon." The next day, Pinnacle issued a press release announcing a strategic restructuring of their wealth management division, with a renewed focus on their core institutional clients. Reading between the lines, it was clear they were backing away from their hastily launched women's initiative, the one designed to compete directly with Sage. Round one to us. But as Diana had said, this wasn't over. We had established ourselves as legitimate competitors in the financial landscape. We had forced a behemoth like Pinnacle to adjust their strategy in response to our existence. We had proven that there was indeed a market for what we offered. But we were still a new firm, still building our reputation, still vulnerable in ways that established institutions were not. The real test would come at the Women in Finance Awards, now just 3 months away. The same event where Bethany had humiliated me a year earlier. The same ballroom where 347 industry professionals had witnessed my relegation to someone's grandmother. This time, Sage was nominated in 3 categories: Most Innovative Platform, Best New Advisory Firm, and in an irony not lost on any of us, Outstanding Leadership, with me as the named nominee. As the date approached, I found myself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of returning to that ballroom, of facing Bethany and all the others who had written me off. Would they see what we had built and recognize its value? Would they acknowledge that they had been wrong about us? Or would they find new ways to diminish our achievements? To suggest that we had succeeded despite our age, rather than because of the wisdom it had given us. The night before the awards, I stood in front of my closet, considering my options. The emerald dress from last year hung there, still beautiful, but now imbued with memories of humiliation. Next to it was a new dress, a deep sapphire blue that Diana had helped me select, elegant, but with a modern cut that somehow managed to be both age-appropriate and fashion-forward. I reached for the emerald dress. Diana's voice echoed in my mind. "Are you sure? Isn't that the dress from ... double quotes exactly?" I had told her. "It's the dress from when they thought they had defeated me. Now it's the dress of my comeback." The next evening, as our car pulled up to the Marriott, I felt a flutter of anxiety in my stomach. A year ago, I had walked into this building alone, vulnerable, still reeling from the loss of my position and identity. Tonight, I arrived flanked by my 4 partners, all of us dressed impeccably, all of us radiating the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who we were and what we had accomplished. As we entered the ballroom, I felt the subtle shift in energy, the heads turning, the conversations pausing. But this time, the whispers weren't about someone's grandmother getting lost on her way to bingo. They were about the women who had built Sage from concept to thriving enterprise in less than a year. The women who had turned their supposed liability, their age, into their greatest selling point. The women who had forced an entire industry to reconsider its assumptions about value and experience. Our table was not in the back this time. We were seated prominently, table 7, within direct sightline of the stage, and as we made our way toward it, I locked eyes with Bethany Williams, seated at table 1 in a striking red dress, her expression unreadable as she watched our procession. I nodded slightly in acknowledgement, neither friendly nor hostile, simply one CEO recognizing another. She returned the nod after a moment's hesitation, and in that small gesture, I felt the shift in our dynamic. We were no longer emeritus and successor, has-been and rising star. We were competitors, peers in an industry that had room for both of us, whether she liked it or not. The ceremony began, the familiar rhythm of awards and speeches washing over me as I sat with my partners, occasionally catching the eye of another woman who nodded in recognition or raised a glass in silent toast. There were more silver-haired women in the room this year, I noticed. More women in their 50s and 60s seated at prominent tables. Whether this was coincidence or the beginning of a shift in industry perception, it felt like progress. When they announced Sage as the winner for Most Innovative Platform, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Susan accepted the award with grace, giving a brief speech about how our lived experience had informed the design of a platform that truly understood the needs of women navigating complex financial decisions in the second half of their lives. We also won Best New Advisory Firm, with Elaine delivering an acceptance speech that managed to be both gracious and subtly pointed, noting that innovation doesn't always come from the youngest or the newest, but often from those who have seen enough to recognize what's missing. By the time they reached the Outstanding Leadership category, I was feeling a complex mix of emotions: pride in what we had accomplished, vindication for the path we had chosen, but also a lingering sense of vulnerability. This was the category that mattered most to me personally, the one that would directly address the narrative that women like me were past our leadership prime. And the award for Outstanding Leadership goes to... The presenter paused dramatically, building tension in that way awards show presenters always do. Margaret Wilson, Sage Financial Partners. The applause was thunderous as I made my way to the stage, the emerald dress catching the light just as it had a year ago, but the woman wearing it transformed. As I accepted the Crystal Award identical to the ones gathering dust on my bookshelf at home from years past, I looked out at the sea of faces, many of them familiar, all of them now watching me with respect rather than pity. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. A year ago, I sat in this very room and was told, quite publicly, that I had aged out of relevance in an industry I had helped to shape. That my experience, my judgment, my leadership were somehow diminished because I had crossed an invisible line into the second half of my life. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, acknowledging what everyone in the room knew had happened. Today, I stand before you as living proof that they were wrong. That we are wrong, as an industry, when we equate youth with innovation. When we dismiss experience as outdated. When we fail to recognize that wisdom is not a liability but our greatest untapped resource. I gestured to my partners at table 7. Sage Financial Partners was born from that misconception. 5 women, all told at various points that our time had passed, came together to create something that didn't exist but should have. A financial firm that celebrates rather than apologizes for the perspective that can only come with decades of experience. A firm that serves a demographic that controls trillions in assets but has been systematically undervalued and underserved. I took a breath, conscious of not letting bitterness creep into my voice. This wasn't about score settling, it was about changing the narrative. This award isn't just for me, or even just for Sage. It's for every woman who has been told she's too old to set in her ways, to anything that serves as code for we want someone younger. It's for every professional who has watched their hard-earned wisdom be dismissed as obsolescence. And it's for every client who has entrusted us with their financial future because they recognized what we had to offer. Not just technical expertise, but the judgment that can only come from having weathered multiple market cycles, personal transitions, and professional evolutions. I held up the award, letting the crystal catch the light. Thank you for this recognition. Sage is just getting started, and we look forward to continuing to prove that leadership doesn't have an expiration date. The applause as I left the stage felt different from any I had received in my career. It wasn't just polite acknowledgement or even admiration for a well-delivered speech. It was recognition, understanding, and from many of the women in the room, especially those with silver in their hair and lines around their eyes, something like gratitude. As I returned to my seat, I passed table 1, where Bethany sat with her executive team. Our eyes met briefly, and in hers, I saw something unexpected: uncertainty. For perhaps the first time, she was seeing me not as a relic of the past, but as a force to be reckoned with. A competitor who had taken what could have been a career-ending humiliation and transformed it into a triumphant second act. Back at our table, Diana squeezed my hand. "Not bad for someone's grandmother," she whispered, and we both suppressed smiles at the inside joke. After the ceremony, as we made our way through the crowd toward the exit, I was stopped repeatedly by people offering congratulations, expressing interest in Sage, even apologizing for not having stayed in touch after my transition from Pinnacle. I accepted it all graciously, neither dwelling on past slights, nor pretending they hadn't happened. As we waited for our car at the valet stand, a familiar voice called my name. I turned to see Bethany Williams approaching, still elegant in her red dress, but somehow less intimidating than she had seemed a year ago. "Margaret," she said, extending her hand. "Congratulations on your wins tonight." I shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip, the careful neutrality of her expression. "Thank you, Bethany. Pinnacle's new international division looks impressive as well." They had won in a category earlier in the evening, though with noticeably less enthusiasm from the crowd than our wins had generated. "Your speech was thought-provoking," she said, choosing her words carefully. "You've certainly proven me wrong about what you were capable of building at this stage." It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get. I could have pressed for more, could have reminded her of her exact words from a year ago. But looking at her now, I realized something. Bethany Williams was afraid, not of me personally, but of becoming me, of someday finding herself on the wrong side of that invisible line, deemed too old, too experienced, too yesterday, of having everything she had built taken away because the calendar had continued to turn. "Thank you," I said simply. "I think we've all learned something this year about the value of different perspectives in our industry." She nodded, seemingly relieved that I wasn't going to make this more difficult than it needed to be. "Perhaps there's room for more direct conversation between our firms in the future. Not acquisition talks," she added quickly, seeing my expression, "but possibly areas of collaboration, industry initiatives where we might find common ground. Perhaps." I allowed neither committing nor dismissing the idea outright. My team would be open to discussions. Our car arrived, saving us from further awkward conversation. As I moved to leave, Bethany spoke again, her voice lower, more personal than it had been. "How did you do it? Start over at ... at your stage." I don't think I could have done it. The vulnerability in the question surprised me. For a moment, I saw not the woman who had replaced me, but someone genuinely curious about resilience in the face of setbacks that would inevitably come for her too, someday. "I had help," I said honestly, gesturing to my partners waiting by the car. "I found people who saw my value when others didn't, and I stopped apologizing for my experience." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "The secret that no one tells you, Bethany, is that getting older in this industry isn't a liability unless you believe it is. The moment you start hiding your age, minimizing your experience, trying to compete on the terms set by people half your age, that's when you've already lost." She blinked, absorbing this aisle. "Keep that in mind, you should. Someday you'll be my age, and I hope when that day comes, you're not pushed aside the way I was. I hope by then, we'll have changed the narrative about when a woman's value in finance peaks." With that, I joined my partners in the car, leaving Bethany standing on the curb, a thoughtful expression on her face. As we drove away from the Marriott, from the scene of my humiliation turned triumph, Diana raised her phone, which was displaying a real-time stock ticker. "Sage is up 4% in after-hours trading on news of our wins." Elaine laughed. "Not bad for a bunch of has-beens." Barbara, ever practical, was already thinking ahead. "The publicity from tonight will bring in a new wave of clients. We need to be prepared for the increased volume." Susan was scrolling through social media. "We're trending. #Sage Wisdom is taking off. People are sharing their own stories of age discrimination in finance." I listened to their excited chatter, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. 1 year ago, I had stood frozen in humiliation, as a room full of colleagues witnessed my erasure from the industry I had helped build. Tonight, I had returned not as a ghost seeking vengeance, but as a CEO whose company was changing the conversation about value and experience in finance. "Where to, ladies?" our driver asked as we merged onto Lakeshore Drive, the lights of Chicago reflecting off the dark water of the lake. I smiled at my partners, these remarkable women who had refused to be relegated to obscurity, who had turned rejection into opportunity, who had helped me find not just a second act but perhaps the most meaningful chapter of my career. "Forward," I said simply. "We're going forward."